welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. Today, we are going to be speaking to Jacki Hill-Murphy, who is an explorer, teacher, filmmaker, and speaker, and has spent the past few years exploring and filming some of the most inhospitable and remote places on Earth. First major expedition was in 1988 when she crossed Africa via the Sahara Desert and West Africa. And since then, she's been to South America, Africa, India, the Caribbean, the Middle East, Russia, lived in Turkey and the United States. Jacki, welcome to the Tough Girl podcast.
Hello, Sarah. Hi.
It's so wonderful to have you on here, and I can't wait to discuss more about all the different adventures that you've been on. But before we start, could you just sort of introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit more about you and your background?
Oh, well, yes, of course. Well, I've always had sort of wanderlust in me, and when I was young, I think from about the age of 8, I always read books about adventures, and I used to read all of Gerald Durrell's books about collecting animals and darkest parts of the world. And I think Kon-Tiki Expedition was probably one of the very first books I ever read, and I was always grabbed by it. And then when I got older, my parents knew that I needed to go somewhere and travel, so they sort of packed me off to Camp America at 18, and then I'd sort of traveled all over America on very small amount of money, of course, and then it was sort of went from there. But I did obviously stop and raise a child in the meantime. So my son is now 26. And I did quite a lot of traveling with him, and I moved out to Istanbul with him when he was quite young, and living in Turkey is much different to going on a holiday. I mean, that's the one thing about traveling the world, is sometimes you need to just stop and spend time in a place so that you can really feel the culture and feel the people and get to know them. So that was quite a wonderful experience. And going to Africa in 1988 was it was a bit like a sort of road to Damascus. Yes, that's what I want to do. I really want to spend a year in a Land Rover in Africa. And I was quite young. And I've now realized that where I drove through in 1988 are parts of the world that you can't go to anymore. And I have been invited by a Nigerian television channel to go and talk to them about driving to Nigeria, because unfortunately now you can't freely drive through northern Nigeria. So it's been fantastic to have started off so young and to have those experiences.
Oh, absolutely. I was going to say it's those opportunities that come up, and sometimes you've got to say yes to them. I actually did Camp America as well. I ended up doing it. Yeah, but it's an amazing way to, if you're not that sort of confident about sort of going off traveling by yourself, at least with Camp America, you can get to go and live and work in a different country. Yes, and at least you get to talk about camp with everybody. It's like, back when I was at camp, I did all these amazing things.
Where were you at camp?
I did it for 3 years. So I did it in underprivileged children in Michigan. I then did a girl guiding camp in on the lake. Underprivileged children in Massachusetts, a girl guiding camp in Michigan, and they qualified me in everything. So I was qualified in first aid and lifeguarding, waterfront safety.
Really good. Yeah.
Well, it was actually, I think I was so overqualified in childcare, and they gave me loads of medical courses as well. And apparently I was 2 away from being a paramedic in the States, which I don't know is more scary for them or for me. But it definitely opens your eyes up to the world.
Listen, it was I was in New York State and on Long Island. We just rode the horses, day off we would borrow a horse and just gallop along a beach. It was fantastic.
It's absolutely amazing. So how did your adventure across the Sahara come about? Because that must have been quite were you doing that by yourself?
No, I was with my husband at the time. No, and how that came about was actually selling a house. And I think that everything I've done has come at the cost of having to pull all my resources together to do it. And we did have to sell a house to do that, because that's a lot of petrol to try to Cameroon and back.
Well, why did you want to do it? What was the reason behind the journey?
I was just so excited. And now I look back and think, why was I so excited? I think I was just so excited about stepping off everything I knew at the time and just going into a new world, and to travel across deserts and to travel through Sahara, and to have the geography books come to life for me, and to find myself in places where white people were very unusual, and to understand how they felt, to see us and vice versa. And it was this big exchange of culture the whole way. And unfortunately, in those days, we didn't have social media in '88, so it's not recorded as well as I wished it was. But I do have all my notes and diaries still.
Oh, it must have been a fascinating experience. What do you think you learned most about yourself from that trip?
I think what I learned most about myself was that how lucky I was to live in a society where we had choices. Because if you drive through Africa, you see people that don't have any choices. I think it was a really big eye-opener for me. And also, I didn't want to ever stop and stare at these people. I wanted to get to know and talk to them. The idea of just driving through a place and just staring at people and, waving is not what I ever wanted. But if we could stay in a village for a while and integrate with them and offer them something and then offer us something back was what I most enjoyed. And that did happen in Cameroon, when we stopped in a tiny village called Koti Manga, where they had little pointy conical roofs. And we just stayed there and just talked to them. And every day we did something with them. And they would try our food and we would try their food. And again, coming back through the Sahara Desert, we would have Tuaregs that would just latch onto us and just spend maybe part of the day just walking with us, sometimes with camels and sometimes without. And we'd offer them a cup of coffee and they would just spit it out. Things like that are just wonderful. And then you laugh together. And when you laugh with people who come from a totally different background, I think that's wonderful.
And it's all about learning about different cultures. And I think travel really does that. You just meet so many fascinating people and the experiences that you have. And it's not about the places that you've been. I've been in some of the most beautiful places in the world and some of the most horrendous places in the world. And it's always about the people that you're with or the people that you meet, meet along the way.
That's right.
Now, you started a project about recreating the journeys of the early women explorers.
Yes.
How did that come about?
That came about because I went back and did an MA. And about 20 years after I went to university, I went back to Sussex to an MA. And I asked them if I could turn a story I'd found into a film. As part of my dissertation. They said absolutely. It was, they really liked the idea. And the story was, I'd found this story of Isabella Godin in a book in the old library at the Royal Geographical Society, and it was a totally unrecorded story of the woman, this first woman down the Amazon. And I knew it was true because I'd gone back to the original sources of the story. Her husband, who was a Frenchman called Jean Godin, had to write the account down for the Academy of Sciences we're talking about 1780. And so I knew it was true, and I just couldn't believe that such an incredible story it was a very tragic story, had gone unrecorded. It was just this one small story. And so I wrote it as a screenplay, and I wrote it, I had to write it in two forms, but then I had to go off and make a living. And I never really did anything with it. And then two very good biographies came out about Isabella Godin. But I said one day I'm going to go and recreate her journey from where she left in the Andes to where she was found and taken, because she was, when she emerged on the banks of the Amazon, she was more dead than alive, and quite mad by that point, and everybody else in her party had died. So I wanted to do that 500 miles, and most of it was by dugout canoe. So we had to cross the Andes and go dugout canoe. And I spent a long, long time planning it, and then finally found myself in Cacabamba outside the school was where her house had once stood, and in the Andes, and mixing with wonderful indigenous people who were walking around in, sort of like clothes similar to what Incas must have worn, with their machetes going up into their fields. I'm thinking, this is just amazing. So I set off from her house and followed her exact route, because it was so well documented I could do that, down through Banos, down through the valley of the volcanoes, valley of the waterfalls, down through into the beginning of the Amazon rainforest to a river called the River Bobanaza. And then when I arrived at Canelos, which was a small village by the side of the river, there was a 40-foot dugout canoe waiting for me. And at exactly the same place, hers wasn't, because her advance party had taken smallpox and infected everybody. And so what should have been for her a very easy ride for a lady who was carried in beautiful clothes in a palanquin over the Andes, and should have been got into her dugout canoe, and all the men were already waiting. They'd all been paid, ready to take her. They'd all disappeared, and the villages were burning, because the advance party, which was her father, had taken smallpox through. And so there I got into my dugout canoe, and then did the journey down as far as just past the border in Peru, where she was to a place called Andoas, where she was taken to recover by 2 friendly Indians who found her eventually. And all along the way, recreated her journey on little sandbars. And you can imagine these rivers have got a shed loads of meanders. They just meander. So at each of those meanders, you end up with sandbars. And at these sandbars, she'd camped and we camped. And unfortunately, they were attacked by Achua Indians, who were very aggressive, and they either died of disease or they were killed. It's not known. There are 2 documents saying it could be one or the other, but she escaped into the jungle. So she lost her brothers, she lost her nephews, she lost her ladies' maids, she lost some con men who were coming along with her. And one of the con men had gone ahead to get help, and he'd obviously never come back with any help for her. So it was just such a tragedy. So that story is yes, I wish one you make it into a film. That's the first part of my book, is that story, and it's just waiting to be turned into a film, because how much more bizarre can life be than what happened to her? And when we think now about the dangers of the rainforest, her name is used because she went into a rainforest completely unable to use a machete or swim, because they didn't have to in those days, 1769. So now the dangers of the rainforest can be associated with what happened to Isabella Goudin.
And what about you? I mean, that's a heck of a journey, like, even recreating this 500-mile trip in the dugout canoe. There must have been certain dangers that you faced along the way. What was it like recreating this journey?
I just completely trusted the wonderful Amazonian guides that I had. I mean, and they were just so fantastic, and I completely trusted them. Even at night, they would play tricks on us, because I went with 2 other female friends, and they played tricks like they would take the boat, and of course we had a motor, didn't we? We couldn't have, they wouldn't have done it. They wouldn't have taken us without a motor, because they had to get back again upstream. But they would take the boat in the middle of the night, like 3 a.m. They would go across the other side, and we thought, oh my God, they've left us. We're here stranded in the, they were fantastic. And then we flew out. I think flying out was probably the most nerve-wracking part of it, because the plane was, I didn't feel any confidence in this tiny plane at all.
How long did this journey take for you to recreate?
Oh, it didn't take me very long. I went with people who only had 3 weeks holiday. But what I am doing in the end of this year, the end of next year, I am doing the whole journey the whole way. And I'm going to be gone for months. I'm going to do exactly the same bit, but I'm going to carry on. And it will be very difficult, because intrinsically what I'm doing is I'm going from one of the sources of the Amazon, to the mouth by public transport. And I think I've told you about this before, that I should be leaving in October. And I'll go by dugout canoe down through all these tributaries as far as Maranon, and then take passenger ferries all the way along the rest of the Amazon. And I will be logging what we see now, and of course logs come into it because there will be a lot of trees that will have gone since her day. I will be documenting what I see and what she would have seen. So I'm doing the whole journey. And then her ship that was waiting for her oared galliot at Iquitos was there for 5 years. So I want to spend time in Iquitos just hunting evidence that there was these men on this ship were there for 5 years waiting for her to try and reach it, to take her to the mouth of the Amazon. That's something I've been wanting to do for a long time.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it would be fascinating. Yes, and I will be, writing a book on that trip and with taking lots of photographs.
No, it would be absolutely amazing. I'm impressed that the guys hung around for 5 years waiting. So
they had no choice because they were the slaves that were oaring the galliot, and they had no choice. They were told to wait for her. But there was her husband had gone down the length of the Amazon and intended to come back for her, and he couldn't. He should have realised that you can't go upstream. 1760s, and so he was left one end. So what he did, he wrote to the King of Portugal constantly put the letters on ships going across the Atlantic, but he never ever managed to get a letter to his wife, who was in Ecuador. It was just impossible to get messages up there. But he kept sending letters to King of Portugal, who finally sent him a ship oared by would have been African slaves. And their furthest point they could go was to Iquitos, and that's where finally she got to the ship. And then it took about another 8 months to do the rest of the journey. I mean, in those days, you're talking, they didn't have what we have today. It would have been very difficult.
I mean, it's even quite fascinating just thinking about what she did and what she achieved, especially back in 1769. And I mean, even now, female explorers, they don't sort of get the publicity and the support that they need in the media. So the fact for her to go out and do that, it must have been, hugely challenging and hugely, what am I trying to say? Just a real. What a woman!
I mean, her story is a testament to female courage and resilience. But she never wanted to be a female explorer. All she wanted to do was to see her husband again. All her children had died of yellow fever and typhoid, and he'd gone. She hadn't seen him for so many years. I mean, hadn't heard from him. So what did she have to lose? Because she'd lost her children, and she thought she was going to be safe because she had family. She had all these porters. They had the Andean Indians, and then they had the forest Indians. By the way, the word jungle was unknown then. That was introduced by Rudyard Kipling. It would have been called desert, meaning a deserted place. That's what the jungle was called. But we can pick up a book, or we know what the Amazon jungle was like. They had no idea. So you're going on a long journey. She would have known it was incredibly long, and she would have known, it could have taken many, many months. But she had no idea really of, who would have been there to tell them about the tribes firing poisoned arrows at them, or snakes, or they did not know anything. It was, unless people had come back and who'd been there, who reported back and told them what it was like. But she was wearing a long dress and little embroidered slippers.
Amazing! I just absolutely love it. Now, she's not the first woman who you've recreated the journey for. You've actually done a few other ladies' journeys.
Yes.
Which would be your next favourite one, which you'd like to share with us?
I don't know if Isabella Godin's is a favourite journey, because I felt so bad for her, because it was so tragic. So it wasn't really favourite. I think that the lady I probably like the most, because she's feisty and funny and drew on leadership skills where I have no idea where she got them from, and that is Mary Kingsley. And I followed her journey up Mount Cameroon in Cameroon, and she was on a ship going to Gabon, under the pretense of carrying on some work for her father, who had been collecting fish in Gabon. And she had all sorts of very interesting adventures in Gabon, which are all very well documented, involving fighting off crocodile with her umbrella and all that sort of thing. But when she was going past Cameroon, she saw Mount Cameroon. Should I want to climb it? And on the way back, she asked the captain to drop her off there, and he went, "Oh no, ma'am, that's no picnic." But she said yes. Now, what a unique woman in a society, 1890s, 1894. This was a woman asks to be dropped off at an unknown African place called, it was Victoria, which is now Limbe. No idea how she would climb up it. It was in the rainy season. There were German governors there, so she may not have been able to, speak German to them. And she would have to have organised it herself. And again, she would only ever wear a long dress. She would never make any concessions to the weather, or, she wouldn't dream of wearing trousers or anything like that. So I just find it absolutely extraordinary that a woman who was uneducated, who had no experience of men apart from her father and her brother, because she was kept in, she was led very, very cloistered existence, to even go and get on a ship at a port in Liverpool, to actually get on it. I mean, how much resistance did she come across in Victorian society then, than to go and get on a ship and say, I'm going to Africa, which was white man's death in that time. It was so many diseases. That's what drives me on, is my fascination for why they did it and the obstacles they must have overcome. And during all that adversity, they can be cheerful and write beautiful prosaic work about what they see.
So how did you find out about her story? How did
So I read about female explorers, almost to the point where nothing else gets a look in at the moment. But I always knew about Mary Kingsley. And then I found out that I'd actually lived around the corner from her in Cambridge when I was 29, and she lived there when she was 29. And I'd walk down the road every day. I love that sort of synchronicity. That's what made me love her more.
Absolutely. And you recreated this journey, didn't you?
Yes, and so I recreated her journey, but of course I had guides, and I had porters. She had a guide. No, she didn't have guides. She had porters with names like Bum and Kefala and Headman and Cook, and they had funny names like that. But they didn't believe that she would climb the mountain, so they took the job and go, "Oh yeah, we'll come with you. We'll take you up there." And she equipped them with food and drink and blankets to carry for themselves, but they'd sold it even before they left, because they never dreamt that an English woman would actually go ahead with it. So they said, "Okay, off we go," in the pouring rain, and they'd sold everything. So they were on this mountain, and they were sort of saying, "Oh, I'm cold," and she would have to send back down for more supplies for them. So even when she got near the top, they were still backing out and saying, oh no, I can't do this. And she got to the top by herself.
Legend.
Absolutely. She was wetter than the Atlantic. But when she got there, she still wrote down that she saw the Atlantic sparkling like a jewel, like a gem beneath her. And she just took it all in and loved it, and got back down and survived. I mean, she had a really bad cold by the time she got back somewhere where she could recover. So she couldn't even take her wet clothes off, because wherever she went, she was followed and watched. So she couldn't risk changing her dress ever. So she stayed wet probably for 10 days. And then when she finally got to what we now call Boué, to a residence of one of the German governors, the house was being built, and there was no door on the room where she thought, finally I can go and take my wet clothes. So she had to put a blanket up. I mean, this woman had no privacy, and that was very, very hard for Victorian women who they didn't have what we have today in terms of facilities and equipment. And for her, in all her clothes, to find herself in that position where she couldn't even change, or certainly didn't have a bath, I'm just full of admiration, basically.
And how did you find it when you reached the top of Mount Cameroon?
It was exceptionally cold, and I found it exceptionally dangerous because we couldn't see in the mist. There was a huge gaping hole that had been blown out the top of this volcano. I'm actually quite glad I didn't see it. But my most my biggest concern was somebody who came with me, who's a great friend, who was struggling. And through the mist, I looked down. I could see this red-jacketed man with this lady, her name is Carmel, on his arm, taking her step by step up the last bit. So that was brilliant that she'd made it up to the top. So, it was a good moment.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
So, you've been doing these, recreating these adventures, and they're just, one after the other. Which has been one of your most recent ones? Was that in the Siberia?
Yeah, the Siberia one is the one that has turned for me to be, it's become a huge, big ongoing project. And I have since been back to Siberia. I was invited to give a speech to 500 social workers in Yakutsk. Now, Yakutsk is the coldest capital in the world. It's in eastern Siberia in Sakha province. And they wanted me to inspire these social workers on the practical humanity of Kate Marsden. Now, this is what I'm writing about now. I'm writing a biography of Kate Marsden. Again, how the world forgot such a woman as her. I found, with another lady who's interested in her, I found her grave in Hillingdon Cemetery, and it hadn't been touched for 80 years. It was unmarked and overgrown. And this woman had crossed Siberia in 1891 by sledge and horseback, often at -50, in the pursuit of two reasons: to find a herb that she thought could cure leprosy, because she decided to devote herself to leprosy after seeing lepers on the battlefield in Bulgaria when she was a nurse in the Turkish-Russian War of 1877. And also she fundraised to build a leper colony in a little tiny community called Viluisk Sosnovka. And the remains of her leper colony are still there. But she never actually saw it herself. She talked about its being built and she designed it, but she was never allowed to go back. Now, when I arrived overland to this tiny village, which is 600 kilometers from the nearest city, which is Yakutsk, this is a community that live 8 months in winter, in the big freeze. It's like, we live in a deep freeze. That's what it's like for them for 8 months of the year. I went in the summer. And I found a community who is still celebrating her. That's why, to me, she's an angel. They think she's an angel. She built this leper colony. So I arrived there, and they knew I was coming. And I think that this is probably one of the most amazing moments in my life, is I arrived, got off this bus, it's an unmade road. It's one end of the road of bones in Siberia. Got off the bus, went straight to the mayor. I had no idea what was in store for me. Taken straight to this little community where the remains of a leper colony are. And there's a little hospital to Kate Marsden. And there's 100 people in a field in full costume waiting for me to arrive. And as soon as I arrived, they started playing all the traditional instruments and singing. And when I say traditional costumes, these are not just something that's just thrown up, sitting there at night and making costumes like for a school play or something. This is seriously beautiful, full costumes. Like, I've never seen anything like it. And that moment that I walked in that field, well, I will never forget as long as I live. It was just so extraordinary. And I was trying to document it with film, and you can't film yourself being filmed. So I handed my camera to somebody who seemed to be walking in with me in some kind of party. I turned, and there was a man behind me and said, "Can you just film? Can you hold the camera for me?" And everybody was laughing. And afterwards I found out it was because I'd handed it to the deputy governor. So on camera there was laughing all around me. But I was just completely blown away by that.
What an amazing welcome. That's absolutely
just totally. And so they love her so much. So since then they put a statue up for her. And I've been sending out materials to their little museum. And so I've sent them out lots of prints, and I gave them an original book with her name signed. And I took a pudding with me right across Siberia, because she took 40 pounds of plum pudding, which she thought was quite a good food to be able to access from a, sledge in the Arctic conditions. So this Christmas pudding went all the way along. And so when I finally got there, I handed it to the doctor who runs the hospital now sits on the land of the old leper colony. And I gave it to her. And when I came back to England, I sent them some packets of custard powder. I said, look, please have the pudding and have it with this custard powder, as we do in England. And I then found out that they made the custard powder and ate it on bread. And the plum pudding, Christmas pudding, is now in a glass cabinet in the museum.
Oh, wow.
I know, it was just, I'm still very, very much in contact with them, because the wooden hospital stands there now, which is now a psychiatric unit, is condemned because it's wooden, and Russia doesn't want any more wooden hospitals. So I'm trying to draw international attention to this little village of Sosnovka so that they would never close the hospital. Because if they close the hospital, then the forest would just close up around the remains of Kate Marsden's leper colony and the museum and a statue. So that's, I'm doing what I can. That's all I can say at the moment.
So Kate did the journey. She did it by horse, sledge, and cart.
Yes.
And you replicated her journey sort of as closely as possible on sort of buses, trains, and boats.
It was very difficult to go exactly the right way. I couldn't. She went on the River Lena, and no captain would take me on the River Lena, that's the bit I'm writing in the book at the moment. My disappointment of having to take a different route to her at that point.
Why wouldn't you be able to go on that river?
No, because they're just the very, very few ships on the River Lena, and no captain was willing to take 2 passengers, because I was with an Australian girl. And especially women, they wouldn't take me. So that was a shame. Plus, we were running out of time, because visas are really, very difficult situation with visas in Russia. But if I can go back to Kate Marsden, on her return to England, scandal was already hitting about her personal life. And she spent the rest of her life being vilified. And unfortunately, some of it is true, because as her biographer, I cannot escape seeing documents which have to be true. So she did embezzle some funds, unfortunately, and she lied. But whatever she did, you think about what was going on in her head, because even nursing, being one of 9 nurses in a war where with 50,000 people die around you, and being the only ones out there, that must be quite a traumatic thing to happen for somebody. And to do that journey across Siberia was just so horrendous. What happened to her, and there was nowhere to stay, and they were, they had wolves they had to keep at bay, and just being knocked around in this sledge so much that it made her ill. As an explorer, traveller, I just think she was amazing. So I wish that the accusations against her weren't stronger than the actual achievement of crossing Siberia. So that I want to redress that balance in my book.
What's the title of the book you're writing?
Right. It's called Mad, Bad, or an Angel. And it's the story of Kate Marsden and my journey across Siberia in her footsteps.
Fantastic. And when's that book going to be coming out?
Oh, next year.
Amazing.
It's a big job, I
was going to say, how far in are you writing?
Oh, I'm 60,000 words in.
Brilliant. Are you halfway through, or?
Yeah. Over halfway. Yeah. It's just that the research has to be, I don't want people to criticize me because I leave things out. I'm very aware of being criticized, and I've never written a biography before, apart from the mini biographies in my present book, Adventuresses, which is out, they're both dual narratives. It talks about their experiences and mine, because I just get a lot of joy out of talking about what they saw and what I saw now and the differences. Well, if I can move on to Isabella Bird, which is a very good example of that. Isabella Bird, I recreated her journey over the Digar Pass in Ladakh, which is northern India, so it's lower Himalayas, and she went up to 5,500 meters of Digar Pass. She was on a yak, and I walked it. Now, this is a very good case in point for the difference of 120 years. Is that when she got to the top of the pass, she looked down over the other side and saw a glacier. She said, fields of ice, she describes it, trimmed with rose red primula. They're her words. When I stood in the same spot, all I saw was a moonscape of grey gravel, because the glaciers had melted. So the glaciers were melting in the summer sunshine for her. I was there at the same time of year tumbling down into the Shark River, causing her to nearly die crossing the Shark River, which she had to do because it was the only way to get anywhere was to cross the Shark River. But when we got to Shark River, there were just some rivulets. So isn't that interesting? You know, you can see it happening so obviously in front of you. And so when I got to Hundar, I described from her book to a local person the house she stayed on of Gergen the monk, which was painted and decorated, this house, with little wooden balconies that they sat in, the ladies of the house sat in to take the winter sun so they didn't have to burn so much fuel. And of course, and he took me there. And he said, we never knew what this building was before. So I actually, you know, went somewhere, was able to positively identify this building from her book. And so that was another great joy. And then at the end of the journey, when I got back to Leh, which is the capital of Ladakh, she talked about having an audience with the king of Ladakh. And I spoke to the person who I had organized it with. I said, she met the king of Ladakh. And then he came and he said, oh, we're going to Stock Castle. Oh, how lovely. He went to Stock Castle. Well, he didn't tell me what he'd planned. And after going around Stock Castle, he took my elbow and said, come this way. We go through a little door. And we went, oh, what's happening? And suddenly we were in a long room and fed pistachio nuts and apple juice. And the king walked in. I had a 10-minute audience. Ladakh was like, I think I've become Isabella Bird. I think I must be her alter ego. So that was really, really, really thrilling. And that's written about in the book, about how all that came about.
Oh, how fantastic. What was it like meeting the king?
Well, he was just a lovely man. He's a figurehead, really, now. And he does a lot of charity work. Lovely man. And he talked to us for a while and talked about Isabella Bird, who we'd heard about, obviously. And so that was it.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Now, on your website, there was actually, when I was looking at it earlier, there was sort of a mini sort of video about the search for gold. And this was part of Isabella Brooks. Would you just like to share a bit more about her story?
Well, I have never found a picture of Isabella Brooks. I know that it happened, but Isabella Brooks, this is 1920 now, so it's a bit more recent, was taken by her husband, Colonel Brooks, into the Janganetes Mountains. Now, Janganetes is 500 square miles of nothingness in the Andes that is unmapped, uncharted. GPS doesn't work. It's totally wild. There are no paths, and you can't survive there very easily. And she was there 3 days, got involved in a flood, made her wet. She couldn't dry off again because even in the middle of summer, it can snow and it can hail, and then the sun can come out, and then it would just pour with rain. It's just a really strange climate. And unfortunately, she died within 3 days of pneumonia, and their guides ran away because they were frightened. So Colonel Brooks made it out, and but he doesn't write really about what happened. So it's very difficult when you don't have a picture, nothing to go on. Apart from there is I think that there is a lake named after her. So I inadvertently ended up organising the first British-led expedition to hunt for the Inca gold with the most incredible Ken Haynes, who's also from Bristol. He joined me, and he was my survival expert. I mean, I couldn't do what he did. I mean, he just took over the running of it because it's such a difficult place to be. And we ended up getting this party of people who came from all over the world to come there with us. And it was such a difficult place to be in. There is something called the Valverde's gold map. So what happened is that King Atahualpa, he had a ransom on his head from the Spanish conquistadors. So they wanted another roomful of gold or something. And then this roomful of gold was on the packs of Incas, on the backs of them, that being taken towards where he was in what is now Peru. But they killed him anyway. And so they diverted all these, I don't know, it's been thousands of Incas carrying all this gold into the Janganetes and hid the gold there. Now, if it's true and if the gold is there, then it's worth billions and billions, and it's all worked Inca gold, beautiful plates and, those beautiful faces and figurines and everything. And the map is somebody called Valverde apparently once found it, and he made a map, and he drew a map, and he wrote about how to get there. But no one has ever managed to get very far. And unfortunately, lots of people have sort of died strange death trying to look for it. And we never even got onto the track. We never got onto the trail of it. And this is after 6 days of walking. It's such a difficult place to be in. I heard a bear outside my tent. We came across evidence of wolves and puma. And, we had fantastic guides, but they weren't really very experienced because no one ever asked to be taken there. And they did comment that I was the first woman they'd seen there for about 60 years, which I thought was quite funny. But what an honor to be somewhere like that. And there above our heads are condors were circling, just watching us. And the horses couldn't go. We had horses, but they couldn't go very far because it's all quaking bogs and razor grass and Fletcher grass. And Fletcher grass is like long arrows. And if it flicks back, you can take your eye out. It's really very dangerous place. And you can go just walk into areas where it just suddenly it will be snowing. And it's in the minute before it was bright sunshine. I think that has got to be one of the most startling landscapes I've ever seen. And I do compare it to Mordor. Lord of the Rings. I think it's the closest thing to Mordor that we have on Earth.
Do you believe in the gold?
I do actually. Yeah. I hope the gold never gets found because the indigenous people and the government of Ecuador would fight over it for hundreds of years, and I wouldn't want to be part of that. But I because someone knew I was there, I got contacted by people, and somebody said, come round, and he arranged for me to go very clandestinely to his house. And on the first time I tried to get there, I was in a taxi, got written off. And second time I did actually get there, and his house was full of things that he'd found in the Janganettes. And this man he went there every year, and every time he went, he got to know it a little bit better so he could penetrate a bit further. And he actually went in a different direction to us. And he had a house, literally a house full of things that he'd found there. But unfortunately, his knowledge of archaeology wasn't very good. And what he didn't realize, as soon as you take things away, you take it out of context unless you label it really, really clearly. And nothing was labeled, so it's all out of context. So it's almost impossible ever to work out the background to all his artifacts. But he did say that he'd found bones, and he'd found caves where people were buried. And I'd love to organise a major expedition to go back with his help and support and go back and try and show us where he'd found some of these artifacts. But it's just such an impossible place to travel in. You cannot carry enough stuff to eat. You'd have to have helicopter drops, and even getting a helicopter in there would be really hard. So, if somebody's listening to this who's brave enough to try and raise an extremely large amount of money, and I think that it would be a very, very interesting expedition, even just finding the trail. And then I think eventually you'll find yourself at a lake, and then I think what happened that the gold is probably at the bottom of the lake, and the changes in the topography of the land that have come across through earthquakes and volcanoes it's probably down so deep or something. It's probably absolutely impossible ever to access it.
Oh my goodness, it sounds like a proper Indiana Jones.
So I don't think I'm Indiana. I think I'm too old to be an Indiana Jones.
Age is but a number, just the number.
Okay, right then.
You obviously, you're finishing your book off, which is all about Kate Marsden, which is going to be absolutely fascinating. Yeah. Mad, Bad, or an Angel. I love the title.
Oh, good. Glad you like that.
What's going to be? Have you got any future challenges coming up, or future expeditions that you're looking to recreate?
Yes, I want to recreate Maud Parrish, who went into the Yukon at the time of the Klondike era, the gold rush, and she did an extraordinary journey all the way along the Yukon River. And in the height of the gold rush, there were nearly 50 boats going up down the Yukon River. Now there are 0. And I think it would be absolutely fascinating to go back and follow her journey and find all the gold mining ghost towns, and to see what's happening to the small communities that still exist. Because my research has shown me that they are 60% Indian and 30 to 40% white people, who are obviously the descendants of people from the gold rush. I want to do that, and I have actually found the most amazing survival expert who's quite famous British explorer who wants to do it with me. So we're trying to find the funding. Funding is the problem. There are some places that you can just about afford to go to off your own steam, and others that you really couldn't. But then I am going to be doing the length of the Amazon at the end of this year, in 2016. So doing Isabella Godin's route again. So starting exactly from where she did again. I'll do all that journey through the avenue of the waterfalls and the avenue of the volcanoes, and down through back on the Bobanaza onto the Pastaza. Pastaza comes out onto the Maranon. Maranon goes into the Amazon. So I'll do that. And I think that will keep me busy.
I think that will keep you very busy.
Yes.
So what would you say, you study these amazing women who've done these incredible challenges, with very little support, and especially in such an era when women just didn't do things like this. What have you learned most from these women that you could pass on to other women and girls listening?
I've learned a lot from it. I've learned that, well, I think that the women who I've most interest me are the women who went on their own, and they didn't go obviously with a husband, and they showed the most amazing courage and, as I said, female resilience. And I think we can never understand what it was like for them to go to a place where they'd never seen a European person. So I think they had to have the strength of character to take the unknown, to accept whatever was going to happen. They had no idea what was going to happen next. And I think that must have been a really, truly remarkable personalities to go off for 2 or 3 years at a time, or with never knowing what was happening next. So they had a real, true sense of adventure, especially Isabella Bird and Mary Kingsley. And there's Isabella Eberhardt, there's Mary French Sheldon, there's Annie Massey. There's so many of them that just whatever was thrown at them, whatever adversity, they just stayed very humble. They were always very friendly. They were always ready to take on whatever was going to be thrown at them. I've got a list actually of these people.
No, that's absolutely.
I've got my book here. I've got 65 names of very tough ladies.
It's such a shame that women don't get to hear about these women unless it's something that you really have to research into and find out about yourself. It's just not sort of out there. When you think of explorers, when I think of explorers, I always think of Christopher Columbus, or generally just men are the explorers. Men are the ones who go out there and find lost cities and find new continents and do all these things.
That's right.
Whereas actually, even as far back as 1769, you've got the first woman traveling down the Amazon, or 1889, traveling in Siberia through not Siberia, sorry, in 1889, the Degar La Pass in Ladakh and places like this. It's just these huge challenges and adventures, and you just don't get to hear about them. So hugely fascinating what you're doing, which is absolutely brilliant. I'm really looking forward to your book coming out and hearing more about your future adventures.
So you think it's extraordinary that they never knew whether they would get home? Yeah. When we travel, we always go knowing that we're going to come home again, don't we?
Fingers crossed, absolutely.
They set out, and they could never say, I want to go home now. Or if anything had happened to them, who would have told their loved ones? Who was there to record it?
And we're so lucky with, we do have like GPS and mobile phones, and you can be in constant contact no matter really where you are in the world. It's very difficult to get that
But
that
haven't
sort of
those things
isolation.
shrunk the world, though? Those things have. We now call it a global village because modern technology has shrunk the world. So when these women went out, the world was a very, very big place.
Yeah.
It's just most remarkable. I'm just full of admiration for them.
No, absolutely. It's so inspiring, the stories that they've done.
And not having waterproofs.
And still wearing long dresses and their silk shoes.
Yeah, because it was at the end of the long dress was the advent of the bicycle in the late 1890s, when women could finally have a bike and cycle a bit further away than they ever had done before. And of course, that was the end of the long dress forever. Then the long dress never came back after the bicycle became popular for women, because then they were allowed to wear bloomers, became acceptable. It's interesting, isn't it?
And you can start traveling more because you're not having to be restricted by the clothing that you wear.
Well, yes, I think so. Yes, they wear sort of baggy bloomers, but it's better than wearing a long dress, really, wasn't it?
So, Jacki, you do have a website where you have a blog and you've got details of all the different expeditions that you've done. Do you just want to share your website with us?
Yes, it's www.adventuresses.com.
Fantastic. And like always, I will be sharing all of the links that Jacki has talked about on toughgirlchallenges.com/blog, and there'll be links there to her books and to her expeditions and to her website. I'll also put her Twitter handle on. What's your Twitter handle, Jacki?
Pink Ginger Films.
Pink Ginger Films.
Pink Ginger, actually. It's Pink Ginger.
Pink Ginger, fantastic. So we'll put it on there. So if you've listened to this episode, send Jacki a tweet. She'd love to hear from you.
Please do. I love to hear what other people are doing as well. Oh. And I'm always open to people joining me for legs of my journeys if they'd like to.
Oh, fantastic. So all you adventurers out there, if you fancy following Jacki on or going with Jacki on one of her amazing recreating these incredible expeditions, then she will be up for it. So all of her details are on her website. Jacki,
thank you so much, Sarah.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. I'll say a massive thank you to you for coming on the Tough Girl podcast and sharing your stories and adventures. Absolutely fantastic. And best of luck with all of your future challenges.
Thank you. And best luck to you with Tough Girl Challenges. I think it's incredible what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Hi everybody, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Jacki. I absolutely loved it. It was quite a different type of episode where I love going back into the history and discussing and finding out more about these amazing women from our past who we just don't know about, and their incredible stories that they've done. I find it such an inspiration. I love things like this. It always makes me want to go and do my own research and read more books about different female explorers. So I hope it's motivated you, and I hope it's encouraged you as well to check out what women are doing. Maybe they just haven't had the exposure that they needed. It's a bit like the problems that we have nowadays with female adventurers and explorers and female sports athletes, but I could obviously talk about this forever. But I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about an email I received. So I did a podcast the other week with Ros Savage, and it was just a little bit of feedback about that episode. So if you haven't listened to the episode, do head back. It was, I really enjoyed the interview, and because I felt I had a lot of parallels with Ros, and I mentioned it. So I received this email, and I just thought I'd read it out to you. The podcast last week with Ros Savage was incredible, so much so that I think I've listened to it about 3 times now. I'd say out of all the podcasts so far, this is the one that has hit me the hardest, and it's hit me in a place where I can't really ignore the impact. I'll often comment that it's strange how fate turns up now and again and presents you something that you need to see or hear at the right moment. Last week's podcast was certainly like that for me, particularly the content in the first 30 minutes, which was not really the rowing specific content, but just that needing a change in direction. Like many others, I'm currently going through a period of reflection myself. And so to hear you and Ros discuss the changes to your lives, the challenges, the parallels, etc., was like, wow. There were truth bullets coming from left, right and centre, and I think that's where I found the comfort in that recording. Don't get me wrong, I love the actual discussion around Ros's rowing challenges, but as is usually the case with me, and I suppose many others, what really hit home was all the surrounding discussion about the why, the paths taken to get to the physical challenge, and those taken afterwards. I believe that this is called life. I think you'd agree that it's not only the physical that makes us tough, but all the surrounding efforts that we go through, the daily struggles, the daily decisions, and the changes we make. I'm guessing that a lot of people, yourself included by the sounds of it, would have found it a very useful, eye-opening and enlightening interview. The whole podcast really resonated with me, and I look forward to hearing your interview in a few weeks' time to see more of where you draw comparisons. So I just want to say a massive thank you for reaching out and sharing this email with me. There was actually lots more that she wrote, but I won't go into that. And I think it's really true. It does come down to sometimes those daily decisions, those simple things that we decide to do or decide not to do. And all of the decisions that we are making now are going to impact our future. So, I mean, I look back specifically with regards to the Marathon des Sables. So this has almost been 2 years in the making for me. And looking back to making the actual decision to do the race. And then from that decision, every other decision has just taken place, whether it's doing the training, whether it's the food I'm eating, whether it's where I'm training. Do I stay in the UK or do I head over to Australia? And these little tiny decisions that you make now will impact you on your future. And I think sometimes I've really struggled with that actually the life that I'm leading now is because of the decisions that I made 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And it's just that time has now gone past and things have happened. So this is the day after I get back from the Marathon des Sables. So I'm releasing this episode on the 19th of April. I'm hoping you've been tracking my progress across the desert. I hope I've made it across the desert. But I will be sharing the highs, the lows, the challenges I've faced, the ups, the downs, the preparation, the training, the race, the recovery, and anything else that you want to know in next week's episode, which will be coming out on the 26th of April. If you've got any specific questions that you want to ask, then please send me a tweet at _tough_girl, all in capitals, or send me an email to sarah@toughgirlchallenges.com, and I will do my best to answer it. So I will be recording next week's interview sometime this week. Hope that makes sense. Anyway, thank you so much for all your support with listening to the Tough Girl podcast. I really appreciate all of the emails that I get from you guys, sharing your thoughts, sharing your feedback. I do appreciate it. If you do have feedback, please let me know. I want to improve. I want to get better. And I want to make sure that I'm giving you the content that you want to be listening to. If there are people you want me to interview, please let me know. If there are specific areas that you want me to drill down and really focus on, again, please let me know. If you tell me, I can listen to you and make those changes. Please do subscribe to the podcast and keep enjoying it. Have a fantastic week, everybody. And I'm really looking forward to next week's episode, which is going to be very different. I will be on the other side of the microphone being interviewed. And it's going to be fun. I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.